Why don't people think a theme like this? Why do they feel that listing themes is the way to go? And the answer, I think, has to do with the CIA. And you may think, conspiracy nut alert, but no, there's actually proof of this. You've got, so the preeminent Can you guys hear me okay? Good. All right, so I'm going to start. So for today, we're going to talk about theme, especially how to identify your theme. We're going to do exercises which are going to be directed at your work, and then we'll just have a discussion. So nice and casual. I'd like you both to introduce yourselves. I don't think you've met, but why don't you say where you're at and then give us a recent story that you'd recommend.
I'm Kim, and I'm from Grand Rapids, Michigan. And the story I just got done reading, it's a young adult, but it's called When a Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. And very few books make me cry. This one made me cry, like tears down my face, cry. So I highly recommend it. It's about this little boy. I mean, he's like 13 and his mom is dying of cancer. And a monster shows up, and the monster is kind of the symbolism of his grief. And it was just the emotional gut punch that this book put me through was impressive. So I highly, highly recommend it.
What age was it directed at?
I would say, I mean, it's definitely YA. I wouldn't say middle grade. I would consider it a little bit just for the weight of it all. I would say 8th grade and up would be what it's, but it's even for adults. It was a beautiful read. So highly recommend it for everybody.
That's great, Kim. So later on, I'm going to ask you what the theme from this book is. And quick poll, how many of you are familiar with Les Miserables? Good.
I saw
That's the book we're going to discuss. Good enough.
Oh, yeah.
That's the book we're going to discuss today. All right, so forward. I wanted just to quickly recap the Bardsy method, and you'll see how our discussion of theme fits right into that. So there's 3 steps. The idea is to write or rewrite according to your vision. So you have a story in your mind that you're trying to tell. Your goal is to tell that story in a compelling way. And as you're telling the story, you use a progressive tool set to maintain coherence, right? It's a organized story, everything fits together, and each part is fully developed. And periodically you stop to assess. And in each assessment, you identify the biggest issue. Once you identify an issue, you go back. You write or rewrite according to your vision, you use the tools again, and then you take a break to assess. And the idea is you repeat to perfection. I'm not going to talk about this too much today, but the main advantage of going through your story iteratively and stopping to assess periodically, and then most importantly, identifying the biggest issue after each assessment, is that you will write more efficiently. So by the time you're done with this process, you won't have to worry so much about coherence, everything fitting together. And then at the same time, you're going to be able to rely on either yourself, the storytelling sense you're developing in one of our directed writing groups or otherwise, or the volunteer you're using to provide the assessment, to make sure the reader is getting your novel. Make sure they can recreate it in their minds and experience it as the wonderful story that you want to tell. The thing about this method is we are entirely focused on the product. Nothing else really matters. There is what you put on the page and what the reader gets. You're going to get a book. The idea is that they're going to enjoy it. They're going to tell their friends, and money, success, whatever. So let me say what we're not. we're not about motivation, right? Everyone here is serious about writing. Otherwise, they wouldn't be coming to Bardsy. They'd be going to somewhere more entertaining. The second thing is we're not about teaching you how to write. Everyone who is with us is a very good writer already. The thing we're focused on is turning that writing into a compelling product. And you know it's compelling when readers react to it with this wow expression that the little girl is demonstrating. That's our payoff. And theme is a big part of that payoff. It's central to a novel's experience. And what you'll see is it doesn't happen immediately. The theme is not something you can just put at the top of every page with an exclamation point. It's something that accumulates over the course of an entire novel. And then it leaves the reader with a takeaway, a lesson, a message that has some kind of impact on them. We're going to talk about that more in a second, but that's our goal. And you might ask yourself, why? Why is this important? And the answer is that novels are all psychological studies. They deal with the human condition. So people read them ostensibly for entertainment, but at the same time, they're soaking in another version of their possible life, whether it's an alien world, whether they commit a murder, if they fall in love. It's all a kind of exploration. And then these scenarios lend themselves to understanding, either a better understanding of themselves and their future, something about why we're here, etc. And given that premise, the theme is almost literally the punchline of your story. So we will talk a little bit about what happens when you don't have a theme. Spoiler alert, that's impossible. But mostly what we're going to focus on today is how you identify the theme in your story. And then secondly, how you're going to use that theme to make your story, your novel, more compelling. Okay. Now let's contrast that with our arch enemy, AI or ChatGPT. The question is, why can't ChatGPT write decent novels? Two answers. The first one is it can't conceive of a work of that length. It just can't. The best it can do is copy a similar work of that length and make changes. And then at a deeper level, it cannot organize themes according to a resonant theme. Now, what's a resonant theme? Well, the idea of resonance, you can think about it like this. I'm human, you're human, I'm telling you a story, I'm conveying something in that story, a message that is unique to my particular artistic vision, and then the human part of you is going to respond to the part of that overlaps with your experience. That is what something does when it resonates with us. It triggers that part of our humanity that is shared. So that's probably the main reason why AI cannot write. It can't write a novel because it doesn't have that vision and it doesn't have that humanity. So a deeper purpose today, and what you can contrast this against, is to think about the humanity that you're bringing to your story. Where is that overlap you're trying to establish with your reader? And then within that overlap, what exactly are you trying to share? And what you'll find is once you identify a theme, it's going to be easier to write a coherent, compelling novel. Why? Because you'll have a sense of what you're doing, what the point is, what kind of meaning you're trying to convey. And that will allow you to focus your revisions and use it as a lens. And we'll talk more about that in just a second. By the way, if you have any questions, feel free to stop me at any time. Any questions so far? Okay.
No.
We'll proceed. So I want to do a quick little thought question. Why are novels so long? So our example today is going to be Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, which I can't pronounce. How many words does Les Miserables have? Over 500,000. That is a lot of words. So why couldn't this author, or any author for that matter, just write this entire message on a single piece of paper? Perhaps a protest sign or a PowerPoint presentation. What is it about these extra 480,000 words that provides value to the reader? That's the background question for understanding how theme works. So we've seen Les Mis. So let's talk a little bit about it. Anyone remember the world? 19th century France. If you know anything about France in the 19th century, it was a mess. There was a revolution. They chopped the king's head off. Napoleonic War. After the war, the royalty, the monarchy was restored. It didn't go very well. They got a new monarch, Napoleon III, emperor, defeated in the Prussian War, World War I, World War II, blah, 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 right? Messy world. More importantly, a world that was in the midst of a transition between traditional kingship, right? You've perhaps heard the phrase ancient regime, which described the absolute monarchy of Louis XIV and his successors, and what came next, which was some kind of democracy, but that was intermixed with the reign of terror. Remember, they had the guillotine, chopping off everyone's head, joink. And then they also had Napoleon, who was in some sense an absolute dictator as well. So that was the world, but it's post that. So people in the novel are experiencing the aftermath of this mess. And they were experiencing the kingship of Louis Philippe, who was on his way to becoming an absolute dictator. And then what happened? There was a revolution, right? One of the peak scenes in Les Mis is when they're all screaming at the barricades and they sing La Marseillaise. La Marseillaise was forbidden, right? Louis Philippe did not allow that song because it was anti-monarchist. That's the setting. Then I just wanted to go over our two main characters. We have Jean Valjean. You remember him, yes? Stole a loaf of bread, sent to prison, eventually becomes virtuous, saves Cosette. And then we have his opposite, Javert, who's a cop. Typical Law and Order wannabe ICE agent. Relentlessly, obsessively pursues Jean Valjean. Then when Jean Valjean turns out to be a nice guy, what does he do? Kills himself. And then we have our more minor characters. Fantine, the beautiful, I guess, prostitute, can't remember. Dead, dies of illness, right? Cosette, her daughter, saved by virtue of Jean Valjean. And Marius, who is a failed revolutionary, that's important, eventually ends up married to Cosette. So we have the world and we have our characters and our arcs. So that's going to go a long way to answering the question, what is the message that Victor Hugo is trying to send? Then there's the second half of it. We need to look at the author. So here's Victor Hugo. If there's one thing about Victor Hugo, it's he hated Napoleon III. Because he hated him so much, he was exiled. Napoleon III's police threw him out of the country. He had to live, I think, in the Isle of Man, which is not a popular tourist attraction. That's where he did his writing, in exile, looking at France. The novel was published in 1862. He finally returned to the country in 1870 after Napoleon III eventually was deposed. remember if he was killed or exiled, but by 1870, he was no longer emperor. The other interesting fact is he was in Paris during that 1832 revolution. There's some controversy over whether he participated in the revolution or he was just an observer / on the scene, but he was there. So what I want to do then is to put these facts together and see if we can come up with a theme for Les Miserables. This is the one I came up with. Morality helps with industrial injustice via compassion by compensating for poverty and oppression. And then on the flip side, this is Jean Valjean. Some people are amoral or immoral. They can't handle this. And Javert, devoted to the law, still immoral, ends up killing himself. Now, this is a little bit unwieldy, and it's also a little bit complicated. But given that, this is what I want your theme to look like. About one sentence, less than 20 words, that captures the entire message of the novel. Now, if we were working on Les Miserables, we would spend more time refining this particular theme and make it something a little more elegant, a little more flowy. But what we wouldn't do is take out any of the specifics. Now, I wanted to contrast this with ChatGPT. These are the themes that ChatGPT lists for Les Miserables, and there's 6 of them. You can take a look at them here. I won't read them all. The contention is that ChatGPT's themes are a useless mess. Why? Because they're not focused enough to leave the reader with something to take away. And then against that, they're not focused enough for Victor Hugo in this case, but an author to use it as a lens to guide their revisions. And absent that, it doesn't do any work. It's a useless exercise. Sure, Les Miserables is about mercy. It's about love and suffering. It's about compassion, blah, blah, blah. That is not enough, right? What did you take away from Les Miserables? This is the test we're going to be talking about at the end of today's talk. Any one of these things is a possible takeaway, but it's pretty random. That is not our goal as an author. And it is certainly not Victor Hugo's goal as an author. So we can mark ChatGPT wrong, first of all. And second of all, we can think about what the actual takeaway is. The actual takeaway should be something like rage. Rage at the old system that killed Fantine, punished Jean Valjean, destroyed Marius's career, and led Javert to suicide. That has to be part of the theme, and then the rest of it is kind of situating that theme so it makes sense given this context. So we want one theme, not a whole bunch. So the primary mistake people make when we ask what the theme of their story is, well, it's about love, and it's about loss, and it's about life, and it's about sacrifice, and it's about candy, and it's about dogs. And they just come up with a laundry list of things. Again, not something that you can hand to the reader as a takeaway message. And therefore, it's going to have no impact, or the impact is going to be diluted. And then secondly, thinking about theme in that way, laundry list, is not useful. Our primary use of this theme is to decide whether or not your choice situations are relevant and whether they are properly constructed. And if it could be any one of 6 things, all of them are going to be relevant. We need a much, much more powerful lens to look at our stories and guide revision. So sometimes people ask this question: Do all stories have a theme, right? And I just read novels for fun. What's the theme of Peanuts and Charlie Brown and Snoopy? What's the theme of, I don't know, think of something more popular. I can think of 2.5 Men because I just saw it on reruns. Think of any novel you've read. Does it have a theme? Yes, it does. There is no way to escape it. Now, for great novels, they're going to have a lasting impact and possibly lead to some change, even minute, in the reader by revealing something about life. Remember back to that psychological nature of novels. The other side of it is if you don't have a theme in your story, or the wrong way to put it, if you assiduously avoid being thematic in your story, the reader will find one anyway, because that's the way our brains work. We're like mystery readers often. We read a story and then we try to figure out what it means to us. Now, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes novels or drafts of novels are so crappy that the reader won't bother putting any thinking into it. They won't bother trying to uncover the meaning. But as long as the story passes a certain threshold, the reader pays attention, and the reader follows it to the end, they're going to sit there and try to figure out what it means. And you've experienced this for yourself. You go to a movie, what happens? You come out of the movie, you think, was that a good movie or a bad movie? Well, and then you think, what can I take away from it? And that is where your mind starts thinking about the meaning and the theme or the message. Same thing with novels, same thing with any kind of artistic work. Art is about transferring meaning from the artist to the audience. In this case, from the novel, the story in your mind, to the reader through words. So let's talk a little bit about how to find your theme. Remember, we're trying to come up with one sentence that encompasses the whole novel, and you have to fit that into about 20 words. So for Rosemary, I see you shaking your head a little bit. It's basically your memoir. What would you want to pass on to someone based off of the experiences you've included in this story? No more than 20 words. It's not easy. The second thing is it should be unique. Oftentimes people say, well, my story is about sacrifice. My story is about love. My story is about beauty. It's not enough, right? What kind of sacrifice is it? What are you saying about love? Who are the lovers, right? What is the scope of this love? What kind of love is it? It has to be unique to your story. The novel is unique to you as an author, and your theme should be equally unique. And then third, we'll talk about this more. A theme is usually implicit, right? It's there. Our goal today is to make it explicit so we can use it in our work, especially to guide our revisions. So, how do you find your theme? Well, the best thing you can do is start with some kind of introspection. Ask yourself, why did I write this? What is motivating me to sit down and put these words into the computer? And then step back, just like Victor Hugo. Well, Victor Hugo hated Napoleon III. I don't know if we can reduce it to that, but he certainly hated the situation in France. He thought it was wrong, morally wrong. And he wrote a novel that was designed to trigger outrage, an outrage of a very particular kind. Outrage that was unique to the situation and the characters. Now, that's not to say that the characters aren't universal and resonant, right? But they're universal and resonant while being situated in this particular time and place. And all these characters, their identity, the background that's attached to that, their actions and choices are consistent with the outrage he's trying to promote. Right? Cosette, pure innocent baby. Fantine, prostitute, dying of consumption. Jean Valjean's family so hungry he has to steal a loaf of bread. Right? Javert, the definition of obsession. The cast was assembled either intentionally, explicitly, or implicitly, unintentionally, with the idea of nailing this particular theme. So you can think of an example, right? Another half of this thought experiment, introspection, is to say, what would you say to your reader, right? You've handed them your novel. What do you want them to take away from it? Something simple, love your child. What does that mean in this context? What is unique about your situation and the child in your mind that is going to go beyond just a stupid, simple injunction? Right? Sure, everyone should love their child. What does that mean? Does it mean giving money to them if they're addicted to heroin? Right? One story from our elite writing groups. Does it mean sacrificing a kidney? Right? You can think of all the different factors and aspects of love and think about how that love manifested in this story in a way to teach a very particular and unique lesson. Okay, that's step one. So figure out what motivates you and think loosely about what you're trying to say to your reader. Then we're going to get a little more specific, and I've called this triangulation. The idea is to try to get all the pieces together, surround the theme, and then zoom in on it and refine it into a sentence we can use. So the exercise that I think is especially useful, and we did this a little bit with the pre-MCS that I emailed to you, list all the elements and situations, right? I have this character. Kim's character is a former, still a demon, right? But formerly had a lot of power and has lost that power. That is central to the character and central to the story. So, therefore, because it's so central, it must be included in the theme, the thematic sentence. So we're going to go through the novel and list everything. All the life events for you, Rosemary, that you decided to include are clues as to what the theme is, what you're trying to say, whether you know it already or whether it's more implicit. And then we're going to backtrack from these clues and think about why they're there. You made choices, right? Kim decided that her character was going to be in a post-power situation. Rosemary, you chose certain life events to put in the memoir and certain life events to leave out. So the question is, why did you make those choices? Then we're going to begin to sketch a sentence, not the complicated mess that I proposed for Les Miserables, but just a simple sentence. My story is about the problems with X. So we can do Kim's already. Something about losing power and your response to that. Rosemary, I haven't read it yet, but again, something about the set of life events you chose to talk about. Now, the danger is we can't have too many. We talked about that already with respect to ChatGPT. Too many means you're not putting the effort in, right? Remember, novels are supposed to be coherent. Coherent means it's a singular story with a singular multidimensional, yes, conflict, and delivers a singular message that accords with your vision. So one theme. And you can't cheat, right? You can't have a massive compound sentence. And. Nope. One theme. Second part is too generic. We're trying to find something that is compelling to your novel, and that means it's going to be unique. This isn't like the Bible where it teaches dozens of life lessons, right? This is your story for the reader to find it compelling, to recommend, to pass along to friends, to buy future books in your series. It can't be generic. So one way to think about it is it's your story. Therefore, the theme should be unique to you. And then your novel is the way of delivering that theme. So genericity is out. Ask yourself, why did I decide to write this story in this particular time and place? Why did I include these characters? All of that gives rise to specificity. For example, Victor Hugo was not writing about 1780s France. He was writing about 1830s France. And if you know anything about the 1830s, what was happening was a massive change in society. You had movement away from an agricultural society into the cities and into a more industrial setting. That is what made it unique to that time and place. Right? If he wrote in 1789, it would have been about aristocrats and peasants and pitchforks and maybe a couple bankers. In writing from the back from 1870 or 60, looking back at 1830, he's writing about cities, what Marxists would call the proletariat. All right. Do you guys want to hear a quick digression? The question is, why don't people think of theme like this? Why do they feel that listing themes is the way to go? And the answer, I think, has to do with the CIA. And you may think, conspiracy nut alert, but no, there's actually proof of this. If you've got, so the preeminent early creative writing curriculum was established at the University of Iowa. It continues to this day. It's the Iowa Writing Workshop. They have an MFA program. All of you heard of that? It's supposed to be very prestigious. One of our members actually went there. But the thing is, it was funded by the CIA in the 1950s. And the one thing the CIA asked them to do was to make sure it was consistent with American themes. The idea was that, there's godless communism, which was about collectivity, and it was popular. And they were, I don't know, can't think of any novelists, but I can think of movies. Sergei Eisenstein, their cultural footprint was getting larger and larger. And as one of their many efforts to propagandize for the West and its ideology, the CIA funded these Iowa writing workshops, a lot of money. So to this day, if you go to an MFA conference, a conference designed to recruit MFA students, you will see that the Iowa booth is 10 times as big as any other booth, right? Other booths are just a little table with a couple pamphlets. The Iowa booth was huge. It has leather couches, it has cucumber water, it has polished pamphlets, because they were endowed in part by this massive amount of CIA money. And what they wanted to do, or at least this was the supposed genius of the person who founded the Iowa workshops, was to set up a theme that was always about the triumph of the individual. It matched the American ethos at the time: individual, merit, hard work, success. And anything that dug too deeply past that was not part of the picture. Now, this was in the 50s and 60s, and of course it has evolved. But I think there's good reason to believe that one reason why people don't think about theme as much as they should is because it was suppressed. The 5 Bardsy elements of a story are character, world, conflict, theme, and plot. If you look at the traditional Iowa workshop theory, it's character, world, plot, right? They tend to diminish conflict and they don't talk about theme at all. Now, perhaps this CIA linkage is the reason. There's a book on that, which I will cite if you are interested. So once we have this sentence, we're going to take that and try to use it. Now, how do we use our thematic sentence? Well, we want to build in that idea into every chapter so that this message, lesson, takeaway emerges by the novel's end. Now, this is the only violation, the only violation of Bardsy's self-contained chapter rule. Now, remember, we try to make sure that a reader can pick up any random chapter in our novel, and the reader is going to have a not too difficult time understanding what it's about and get something out of it in terms of some kind of peak and some kind of closure, some kind of satisfaction. Theme violates that, right? Theme steadily builds over the course of your novel so that it is delivered at some point with an all-powerful punch. The problem is you can't control exactly when this punch will appear. For example, again, you can't write the theme with an exclamation point at the top of every page. People are going to stop paying attention after page 1 or 3, maybe. You have to weave it into the novel so that it emerges through the story, keeping in mind that the reader at some point is going to figure it out. Now, some readers may never figure it out. You kind of have to write them off. The majority of them, the super majority of them, will figure it out, and if you've done your job, they're going to appreciate it. That's our goal. So how do you do this? You have your nascent thematic sentence. You want to go through and check every choice situation to see that it aligns with that sentence. Either the situations in your book are supporting that theme or they're not. If they're not, you can either revise the situation so it fits, you could eliminate the situation, or you can alter that sentence. Right? I forgot that this was part of my theme. Well, I don't have to drop it out of my book. I love this scene. I will just modify the theme a little slightly so it covers that. And I'll go back, again, the iteration process, repeating, and I'll go through and make sure every choice situation aligns with the new sentence. And then the final test is just to ask a reader. This is a version of our standard retelling test. What is the theme? Is it resonant? Why would this be important to you? How could you see this applying to your own life? And then, equally importantly, does the story compel agreement with this theme? So on the one hand, they could say, yeah, this is the theme, and hopefully they'll get a version of your sentence that's similar to what you're saying. It probably will be more generic, so you may have to press them. And then you're going to ask them a quasi English course question, what about this? Can you see anything that didn't align with this? And if they have trouble figuring out what the theme is, probably it's because there was inconsistent or contradictory messages in the book. Right, well, on the one hand, love conquers all, but on the other hand, the lover had to die. So that contradiction undermines the theme. And so our goal is to see if they can get the theme, and if not, what's preventing them from getting it. And usually they'll be able to point to contradictions if they're a careful reader. Well, in chapter 4, this happened, and that doesn't make sense in terms of this particular message. All right. Lots of information. So
Bardsy delivers the tools, guidance, and support you need to produce compelling novels. Our well-researched and thoroughly tested approach includes our minimum complete story, a 90-second exercise that keeps your writing on track while fueling creativity. Bardsy Publishability Index, a 23-dimension checklist that offers attainable goals and provides actionable feedback. And our brand new comprehensive character developer that helps you construct unforgettable characters. Come see for yourself at Bardsy.com today. Try our workshop or enter our first chapter contest. Then, when you're ready, Elite Membership delivers writing groups, personal coaching, and a curated community. With Bardsy, your work will captivate everyone, from agents to publishers, and, most importantly, your readers.